In addition to Gay Pride Month, this is also Men's Mental Health Awareness Month. I'm sure a few of you didn't know that, especially the cisgendered straight men who are always in my comments talking about how I'm a misandrist and I don't care about men and their mental health. I actually do care about men's mental health. I care about it a great deal. It's men that don't care about men's mental health. I was thinking yesterday about The Handmaid's Tale, and I know what you're saying. What does this have to do with men's mental health? And the answer is everything. It has everything to do with men's mental health. So I was thinking about chapter 32 of The Handmaid's Tale. So Offred and the commander are in his study. And for those of you who are not familiar with the novel, even though this is a very, very conservative theocracy society that they've built in Gilead, the men still behave like they did before. The men still engage the services of sex workers. So for the women who weren't fertile, who couldn't cook, they couldn't be Marthas, they could be aunts, and they couldn't be handmaids. A lot of them end up at Jezebel's, which is a sex club that all the commanders go to in Gilead. Also, her and the commander play Scrabble, because as much as the founders of Gilead like to say that, oh, we think women shouldn't read and we want women to stay in the home, we want them to have absolutely no place in the world, they are dying for intellectual stimulation and they don't want it from their wives. So on occasion, Offred and the commander play Scrabble. And in one such time, this is the exchange that occurs. Commander, the problem wasn't only with the women. The main problem was with the men. There was nothing for them anymore. Offred says, nothing? But they had, and he interrupts her and says, there was nothing for them to do. They could make money, I said a little nastily. It's not enough, he said. It's too abstract. I mean, there was nothing for them to do with women. Offred says, well, what do you mean? He says, I'm not talking about sex. That was part of it. The sex was too easy. Anyone could just buy it. There was nothing to work for, nothing to fight for. We have the stats from that time. You know what they were complaining about the most? Inability to feel. Men were turning off of sex even. They were turning off on marriage. Any of this sounding familiar? Offred responds, do they feel now? Yes, he says, looking at me. They do. I'd like to know what you think. I don't think a lot, she says. And then the narration says, what he was looking for was intimacy. I can't give him that. Even in that world, men crave emotional intimacy. They crave love. And still, they've arranged this whole society the way they say is the best for the men. And the one thing that they need is the thing they can't get. That society is still not providing them. They're so obsessed with purpose and control that they forget about love and intimacy, which is what they really need. Moving on. There's hardly any point in me thinking, is there? What I think doesn't matter. Voiceover says, which is the only reason he can tell me things. No stakes for him, right? You're basically talking to a slave. If you're talking to a slave, it doesn't matter what you say because A, they can't repeat it anywhere, and B, even if they did repeat it, no one would believe them. Come now. I'm interested in your opinion, he said. You're intelligent enough. You must have an opinion. About what? She says. What we've done. How things have worked out. I hold myself very still. I try to empty my mind. I think about the sky at night when there's no moon. I have no opinion, she says. He sighs, relaxes his hands, but leaves them on my shoulders. He knows what I think, all right. It's like, bro, why are you asking? You're going to ask a slave what they think about being enslaved. You know the answer to that question. You can't make an omelet without breaking some eggs, he says. We thought we could do better. Better, I say in a small voice. How can he think this is better? She thinks to herself. And this is where that famous quote that everybody knows comes from. Better never means better for everyone. It always means worse for someone. So that's the full context of that scene, right? Everybody knows that quote at the end, but not everyone knows the context in which it is spoken. And I want to go back a little bit to what he said about the problem, what the problem was. The problem wasn't only with the women. The main problem was with the men. There was nothing for them anymore. There was nothing for them to do.
Just like the generals, men need to approach mating and dating through the lens of some overarching purpose.
The sex was too easy. Anyone could buy it.
If a woman gives away sex too freely, men will meet that criteria. And if the criteria and the bar is set unbelievably low, men will do what's asked of them, which is not very much.
There was nothing to work for.
The real reason the modern man does not want to work is because his paycheck no longer gives him complete power and control over women.
There was nothing to fight for.
If the generals weren't fighting for something they believed in, then even the smallest sacrifice might not be worth the price of victory. And there are things that you can do with a woman that justify acceptable losses. Chief among them is starting a family and creating a legacy for yourself.
You know what they were complaining about the most? Inability to feel.
Most men are not really aware of what they're feeling. And so then they'll say, I don't feel a whole lot of emotions. Like,
our Great Depression is our lives.
Men were turning off on sex even. They were turning off on marriage.
Reason why young men especially are hesitant to get married is because for a lot of men, they don't see any benefit from it.
Society we're creating right now, more and more men don't want to get married.
Name one benefit that a man gets from marriage that he wouldn't get in a regular relationship.
When they signed up for patriarchy, they didn't sign up to argue with their property. Now, when the woman will not give them a wife, which is an indentured servant, and a baby, which is a legacy, these men are not getting the benefits of patriarchy.
And this is the only time in the entire book where a character bothers to explain the horror that they have wrought upon the country. An explanation, some kind of explanation as to why they destroyed their own country in order to build a theocracy. All those reasons he lists there, they are all the things that the broadcasters complain about.
Both men and women are retreating from relationships. Extolling the virtues of casual sex and no frills attached and sleep with them and don't catch feels.
That the red pillars complain about.
Most women don't need you anymore. They're more educated now than ever before, and they've ever been, and they make more money than they ever made. All these chicks are fucking. And then on top of that, they don't want normal guys because if they don't need you to provide for them, well, what's left?
That Scott Galloway is complaining about.
Young people aren't having sex. They're not meeting, they're not mating, which lessens household formation.
That economists and world leaders are complaining about.
We got a problem. We're not having children. United States fertility rates have collapsed.
They're all the same things. Male loneliness, men's lack of interest in sex. Women's independence left men without a purpose, they say. They can't be protectors or providers anymore. Sex is too easy to obtain, therefore it's lost its meaning. Yeah, if sex's meaning was conquest, of course it has no meaning then. Trying to convince or trick a woman who didn't want to sleep with you into sleeping with you. That was part of the fun for them. And the fact that women can just walk up to you and say, hey, I think you're cute. Would you like to have sex? That's not good enough for them. So it was subjugating women that restored meaning to men's lives. And we hear this echoed now. The only way to give men back that meaning is for women to suffer. Because all the solutions, either explicitly spoken or implied, involve women sacrificing in order for men to be able to feel better. All the answers in these people's minds is sacrificing women for the sake of men's feelings.
Women want monogamy for men that have money. It ain't happening. I believe in the nuclear family. I think it's the best and only way to raise a child properly. I will never be monogamous because that's stupid. I don't make money to fuck one girl. That's dumb.
Your refusal to date conservatives is one reason we have Donald Trump.
You're not going to keep your last name. Doesn't that feel like you're not really getting married then? Obviously, rape is a heinous crime. It's one of the most heinous crimes there is. Incest, too. The method of conception doesn't really matter to the rights of the baby. Then, when you get to the question of the risk to the life of the mother, this basically does not exist.
The idea that I need someone to meet me intellectually, who has the same depth of feeling as I do, all of that is nonsense.
They want to subjugate an entire class of people, once again, just so these guys can feel like men again. Once again, elevating a man's feelings over a woman's life. They think this is going to solve their problem. They think if we just went back to the good old days of the Puritans or the good old days of the 50s or whatever ideal time the particular man talking thinks it is, they think it's going to solve their problems. It's not. Because as Fred said in that scene, the biggest problem was the inability to feel. What kind of culture says that men's feelings are more important than women's lives? More important than democracy? More important than freedom? I would just say patriarchy, but I don't think that answer is precise enough to really have a deep discussion about this problem. So I did some Googling today, and I struck gold. It has been the theory of a lot of women that the root cause of this problem is that men are not taught how to understand and express their emotions properly. The only way they know how to express emotions is through violence and rage. Most of them. Hashtag not all men. It turns out there's a word for this.
Alexithymia is a clinical term that means color blindness to your internal emotional state. Most men are not really aware of what they're feeling. And so then they'll say, I don't feel a whole lot of emotion.
Normative male alexithymia, NMA. This was a term created by a researcher named Dr. Ronald Levant in 1992 in a scientific paper that he wrote. Alexithymia, also referred to as emotional blindness, is a neurophysiological condition that makes it difficult to recognize, express, and describe emotions. There are many symptoms listed here, but the ones I want to draw your attention to are these. The first one, obvious, difficulty identifying and describing emotions and distinguishing feelings from bodily sensations of emotional arousal. So you have a physical feeling and you think, hey, I'm horny, I'm hungry, I want to punch something. But really, you're just sad. Limited imagination and creativity. I find that when I talk to some of these internet dude bros and I say something very simple, a very simple concept. An example is, I was on a live a few weeks ago and they were talking about how to raise your sons to be better. And they were asking the women on the panel, well, how do you think, if you think we're wrong for raising sons the way we do, how do you think we should raise our sons? And then all of us basically said something to the effect of, why don't you just raise your sons to be decent human beings, to have empathy, to have kindness, to be able to regulate their emotions? And it was like we were speaking a foreign language. It didn't compute. Their imaginations were so limited that they couldn't think of a world. They couldn't imagine a world existing outside of their narrow view of masculinity.
I miss a dominant masculinity, an agreed upon hierarchy.
No creativity, no imagination in these guys. A tendency to focus on external events rather than internal experiences. What does that sound like? That sounds like external validation, which is what men are always chasing, right? They are obsessed with external validation, in particular, the approval and the validation of other men, not women. They're interested in what men think of them. Preference for routine and structure. A lot of these podcast bros are really into stoicism. where everything's about like control and routine and like not feeling your emotions, not expressing your emotions, very like rigid and controlled, right? Difficulty forming and maintaining close relationships. Most of these guys don't have friends. A tendency to avoid emotional or intimate situations. Yeah, they never want to talk about emotions. They never want to be vulnerable. They never want to do anything. And they claim it's because, when we're vulnerable, women weaponize it against us and they make fun of us. But because they're so emotionally stupid, they don't understand the difference between being vulnerable and sharing emotions and trauma dumping. Trauma dumping is a form of manipulation. These guys are so messed up. They don't know the difference between being vulnerable and emotional abuse. That's how bad this situation is. A lack of empathy or understanding of others' emotions. Yeah, lack of empathy with men is a big problem. Big problem. And finally, this was interesting. Poor recognition of emotional expressions in faces. These guys did not notice that they'd hurt your feelings because they don't know how to read facial expressions and to get a sense of what someone else is feeling. They don't know how to do that. NMA is typically found in boys and men reared to conform to traditional masculine norms. So a good indicator of whether or not a man has normative male alexithymia is whether he was raised and reared with traditional masculine gender norms, traditional masculinity, basically toxic masculinity, right? Masculine norms that emphasize toughness, stoicism, and competition and discourage the expression of vulnerable emotions. Well, how about that? I hate, I don't want this to come off as a gotcha. I hate being right about this shit. I hate that the world looks like it looks, all because men won't fix their shit. I wish it wasn't this bad, but we've been saying this for years. Feminists have been saying for years that this is the problem, that unprocessed male trauma is the problem. An NIH study found that the prevalence of the rate of alexithymia in men is twice the amount of that in women. Men have double the instances of alexithymia. Wonder why that is. I can't imagine. Dr. Levin proposed that the NMA hypothesis to account for his observations in his patients of many men who learned to hide or not express their feelings because they believed it's what they should do as a man. They needed exercises to practice how to express their own feelings and recognize that they were having feelings and recognize what feelings they were having. This is a skill that grown-ass men did not have who have this NMA thing. He theorized that those men had been discouraged as boys from expressing and talking about their emotions or even punished for doing so. Every man I have ever known has had an experience like this several times throughout their life. Either if they didn't get it at home, they got it in school. If they didn't get it at school, they got it from their friends, later in life, whatever. The whole, act like a man, don't be a pussy, blah, blah, blah. These messages, they get these messages constantly throughout the course of their lives. So the reason he identified it as normative male alexithymia is because the culture that produces it is so ubiquitous that he was seeing this among so many of his male patients that he's like, I gotta give this a name because this is a thing, which of course supports what we've been saying all along, what critics of toxic masculinity, critics of red pill, critics of all these misogynistic ways of thought have been saying forever, that this behavior is not natural. It's taught.
It's not born in you.
Thing that is taught to boys and that is reinforced all the time throughout that boy or that man's entire life. This is cultural, not biological. Examples of this behavior also include sentiments of anti-femininity, constantly hating stuff that women like. And this could be things as like profound as, menstruating, childbirth, demeaning and saying degrading things about women in the context of those activities. But it could also be things as simple as, You know, we make fun of girls because they like pumpkin spice lattes. Every fall, it's like, basic bitch season is here. Time for pumpkin spice lattes. And anything that women or girls really like. I've made content about this before. Making fun of girls for liking Taylor Swift, for liking certain colors, for liking astrology, whatever the thing that women and girls are into at the time, they're against it. They're very anti it. They speak very derogatorily towards that thing and any woman who is interested in that thing. Research shows that the more a man identifies with traditional masculinity, the higher the levels of alexithymia. There's also evidence that when they're born, boy babies, boys are more emotionally expressive than girls. But we basically beat it out of them over time. And by the time the kids reach the age of 2, already they become less verbally expressive. By the time they're 6, it's almost like the process is complete. Less verbally expressive and less facially expressive. By age 6, y'all. It turns out there was a meta-analysis about this that was performed in 2023, just a mere year ago, right? It's called Traditional Masculinities and Men's Sexism, a Meta-Analysis. I'll link the PDF in the notes for this video. Here's an excerpt. Quote, previous studies have reported a positive correlation between traditional masculinities and men's sexism, limiting women's personal and professional opportunities. To quantify this relationship, a meta-analysis was conducted using 107 independent samples, mainly from the United States, of 21,078 men reported in 44 articles between 1984 and 2021. Although we observed that traditional masculinities positively correlated with men's sexism, there was a wide variability in the size of the effect. The relationship was significantly different between different forms of traditional masculinity. The relationship between sexism and conformity to masculine norms and traditional masculine ideology was stronger than the relationship with gender role stress. Further, traditional masculinities were more strongly related to forms of sexism that reflect overt negative attitudes towards women, old-fashioned and hostile sexism, than to forms that reflect covert sexist attitudes, modern and benevolent sexism. And this is what we've been saying all along, right? The type of problematic male behavior that is causing the problems is a result of socialization. This is what explains the quote unquote gender war. This is the cause. This is why. And there's data. How do we stop it? We just decide to. We can decide as a society that we don't want America to descend into a theocratic hellscape. So many things can happen if we collectively as a people decide that we want these things to happen. Because changing our thinking is the first step in changing our behavior. Changing your worldview. Changing the way you think. Recognizing the patterns and the structures that are making your life worse than it has to be, that are limiting your freedoms, limiting your opportunities, harming you. Recognizing those structures, being able to identify them, identify the problem, and identify a solution, and advocate for that solution. Change your behavior, you change your community. Change your community, you change your state. Change your state, you change the nation. Change the nation, you change the world. That's what I'm going for. I said it was simple. I didn't say it'd be easy.